Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the workshop. So today we're going to present the results of the CULTURA Project, but we're going to do it in a way that hopefully will be accessible, not just in terms of understanding, but to give you ideas that might inspire your own research, but also give you avenues to connect to the variety of very high quality researchers that I was lucky to have in this project. So I'm going to use a very kind of awkward food metaphor as part of this presentation. So how about culture served your way? So obviously I realize we're starting a little bit late on the agenda. But I'm going to talk for less than 20 minutes just to give that overview, get that high-level view of what this project set out to do and what we achieved at the highest level. But I'll return with some of the outcomes later on. Then we're going to talk about participatory design and evaluation. Users are at the heart of everything we do in CULTURA, so it's very important to get a sense of how we integrated those users as part of this work. This is a piece of research funded by the ICT side of the European Commission, so the Information and Communication Technology. So technology is, what they're trying to promote, but it's not technology in isolation, it's technology in practice. So this tool set, this environment needs to be of value to the end users. So integrating them was important. But at that point, you will have heard enough talking and you'll want to see the artifact itself. Now, this is something you can log into yourselves at any stage, but we'll run through a demo that'll take about half an hour. You get to see all the facets of this environment and how we deployed it for different types of users. Following that, we'll talk about some of the technologies, because we do quite a lot of processing of text. We normalize it, we extract entities from it, and we offer different ways to explore it. And a lot of the texts we work with have very rich social networks within them. How do we find who is related to who, who's talking about whom in this content, in an automated way to allow users to access that and get down to those fundamental resources. Then we're going to talk about personalization. So personalization is something that's at the core of a lot of the research we do here in Trinity, but it's an idea that can be quite tricky to understand. Well, if things are personalized, well, how can we also explore? Are we not being given a certain result? So the challenge here is to balance personalization exploration, and Seamus Lawless will talk about that. And as mentioned, then I'll give an overview of the kind of outcomes that we have. So at the outset, 3 years ago, we had this mission, this idea, that we're going to pioneer the development and fusion of dynamic personalization. So this is an environment that's going to continuously tune and alter its behavior in accordance to what the user's doing, how they're interacting with it, what activities they're performing, what click-throughs they're making. We're building a model of that behavior, so that dynamism is important. Contextualized to actually the tasks that they're trying to perform. So what are they trying to get out of this environment? So if they're performing a bit of research, how do we monitor that to support them in achieving that task? Utilizing social analysis, both social analysis of the content, but also of the researchers themselves. How are they connecting and working with each other? And importantly for us in a digital humanities context, we wanted to work with complex problems, complex research issues that involve delving deeply and interacting with these resources and involve a dialogue with a resource as much as it does with other human beings. So CULTURA stands for Cultivating Understanding and Research Through Adaptivity, a slightly clunky name, and we pulled out that nice cultura from it, but all of the words there still mean something for us. It's important that through engaging with an environment like this, that the users are building an understanding, they're gaining an insight into the material. And research is at the core. And research is not just something that happens in academia. And we'll talk about this. We'll talk about the breadth of users that we engage with. Because research is anybody trying to find out something, or anybody with an interest in something who's developing that understanding and then wanting to go beyond that kind of basic understanding that somebody else has delivered for them. It was funded by the European Commission under the Framework 7. And it's one of their smaller collaborative mechanisms, what's called a STREP. So it was a partnership, and I'll talk about the partnership of about 7 partners. It's run for the last 3 years and finishes at the end of this month. Well, this round finishes at the end of this month. I'll talk about the future plans later on. We have 2 websites that are really worth checking out. This is our information website, so this is where you'll find our publications, you'll find details of the work we're doing, you'll find information about different events that we've held. But this one is the portal itself. This is the artifact, this is the product that we have produced. And this is not just going to finish on this date. It's not finishing at the end of this month. It'll endure for at least 3 years, and I'll talk about that again as part of the future plans. So one of the challenges that we had to encounter and work with was this notion of the artifacts themselves. And we've been exceptionally lucky in this project to work with kind of 2 top-tier collections. And by top-tier collections, I mean ones that have had an awful lot of work done before the project began. Because some of the challenges we're looking at here are, first off, do we have active communities of researchers? So who's working with the material? And we want to look at high-impact cultural heritage resources. So specifically, we looked at the 1641 depositions, which are a large collection of handwritten manuscripts housed here in Trinity College. But if they're just handwritten manuscripts from the 1700s, from the 17th century, they wouldn't be particularly useful to us. So they have been transcribed. And that was a previous project which took an awful lot of effort to do that. And to give it a sense of that effort, there were 20,000 pages of these handwritten records, and they are exceptionally noisy. So what do I mean by noise? Well, there's inconsistency in the spelling because English was not a standardized language at that time. There's very little punctuation. Also, they're using Irish place names, and these are English clerks writing Irish place names. So the place names were inconsistently written each time they try and write it down. So we have an awful lot of noise in this material, and we'll talk about how we handle noise, because that's a very important element for us. But we wanted to work with a kind of a contrasting collection, so we also worked with the IPSA collection. This is a collection of illuminated manuscripts, several thousand folios of botanical and astronomical material. And they're all beautiful pages like this, and you'll see some examples later on when we demonstrate the system. But what they don't have is they don't have any transcribed text associated with them. So there are some textual elements, but it has not been transcribed. So how can we work with this? I mean, what can we do? So what we do not do, we do not look at the images and try and understand the images themselves with machine processes. What we're working with in this example is very rich metadata that was pre-authored. Again, an expensive and time-consuming process that was put in before the project. So we are working with very kind of well-managed and uplifted collections in the sense that they have transcribed, produced very high-quality metadata. So we're very lucky to be working with that, and we recognize that that's not a typical situation in many archives. But they're very different. Metadata on one hand, full text on the other with some partial metadata as well. During the course of the project, we decided we'd add a couple more collections. So from the Irish Military Archives, we've ingested a large volume of the witness statements from the 1916 Rising. So these are witness statements that were taken in the years following the Rising, and also some of the pension records which are now going online. And they are typically typed out. They were scanned, they were OCR'd, so that using optical character recognition to grab the text so that a machine could understand it. And from that point, then we use the technologies that we talk about in Cultura. So we're going to talk about things like normalization, entity extraction, and we'll see how those technologies can be applied to this type of textual corpus. We're also looking at the Sherlock Holmes canon. It's a very different kind of domain. It's not a historical resource, but it has similar challenges. People, places, events, dates mentioned in this text. So how can we work with that material? I mentioned or alluded to it earlier that and here's where my clumsy food metaphor begins. We have a variety of diners. We have a variety of different end users, and they're on a continuum of experience, starting from general members of the public who would have no particular insight or understanding of a particular event. They may not even know the context of it. So how do you introduce somebody to a very complex issue with a repository of very kind of deep information and guide them into that? Then through to informed users. So these will be local history groups or people who have a specific interest. Again, maybe members of the public, maybe in an institution of some form. Through to apprentice investigators, so for us like MPhil students or master students who have decided that as part of their formal studies, they're going to pursue an interest in a particular material. And then through to professional researchers whose job is dedicated to examining and deepening understanding of a particular corpus. But that seems a little bit too neat. I mean, we've got kind of 4 blobs, and nobody neatly fits into any of these. So it is a continuum of experience. People are shifting and changing their needs through this. And this is where the argument for personalization begins. That if we can guide somebody who has no understanding of a content set from the outset and start to introduce the basic concepts that may be authoritative in the sense that an expert may have written some introductory material to help them understand, for example, the context of the 1916 Rising. How did it come about? What were the main kind of causal factors? And what were the main outcomes of it at a very high level? Because what we're offering then are witness statements that are quite deep. Individuals talking about what they did on those dates. And if you didn't know that there was an uprising in Enniscorthy, for example, you might be reading something not knowing why it makes sense that these things happened. So that continuum is important to us, and you're going to see us refer to that a number of times during the presentations today. When it comes to the recipe then, we need to blend a few things together. First and foremost, the user is central, not just to how we operate in this project and how we have examined their needs and their requirements and ensure that we meet those, but in the user's engagement with the technology, the portal, we need to ensure that the user, first off, is free to explore. This is not an environment that's saying, here's a view of the world, accept it. This is an environment that's opening up an exploration possibility. And one of the presentations later on is titled Balancing Personalization and Exploration. How do we achieve that balance? So as the user's exploring, one of the things we're doing is modeling their interests. So we'll see how we do that later on, but those interests are based on what they navigate to, how they click through on things, what they annotate, what they bookmark. All of those activities indicate to us a degree of interest at a point in time on a material. And it's that interest that we use to build a model of the user. And that's what fuels personalization. And this is on-the-side, non-invasive personalization, recommendations, highlighting certain aspects, but not interfering with the artifact, not forcing or hiding any artifacts from the user. That's very important, that they're still free to explore and ignore the personalization if they wish. Because we can ultimately never know what their task is, and even the user's task can evolve very rapidly as they do an exploration. And it's user-centric. So any decision the system seems to make, the user should be able to scrutinize and examine if they wish. And that's really a powerful mechanism, that the information we gather as they explore to build this topic-driven user model, the user can scrutinize. They can go and see a visual representation of that model, and they can prune it. They can say, no, I'm not interested in this. And they can inject additional things. I'm interested in this. And we've found that that's very useful for users to reflect on their own activities. As they're, certainly for apprentice researchers, they're doing stuff, and they don't necessarily stop and think, why am I examining these things? And then they get to a point where they realize, well, actually, I'm starting to pursue an interest in this area or in these types of activities, so these particularly violent events or whatever the example might be. But in order for us to do a lot of this, we need to understand the content in a really deep sense. So I've talked about the quality of material we had coming into the project. But what do we do? So first off, authenticity is very important to us, that they haven't been artificially massaged, that the transcriptions are good, that the metadata is authoritative and is well recognized as being of good standing. Because we're going to do an awful lot of entity-based work. So by entities, we mean we're going to look at that text and try and figure out who are the people in it, what are the events, where are the places, so that we can pin those down in that text. And that gives you a model that sits just above the text that allows you to infer certain things about it. It allows you to figure out if this might be of interest to a user. Now, we're not trying to necessarily distant read. What we're trying to achieve is for the users to be made aware of these different items so that they can find them and that they're made aware on the side. The third element then is community. That we're looking at user-generated content. So people make contributions, but how do you manage those contributions? If a school child makes an annotation, is it valuable? Well, that's not enough information. I don't know. So what if the annotation is pinned to a certain location? It's a rebel song that was sung only in somewhere in Monaghan. Well, that's starting to sound more interesting. And is that more interesting or more valuable than a piece of authoritative material that a professional researcher adds? Well, depending on the context and the user, the answer might be yes. So it's finding that balance, and that's a challenge for us. And how would we look at collaboration in an environment like this? So the ingredients for us then are a suite of technologies. The first offer the high-quality digitized content. Then we look at a content management system. So we use a content management system called Drupal, which is a very common system for managing content online, so people publishing articles and managing users' access to those. So we're using a very standard architecture to build this environment on. It has a set of content repositories where we actually store the material and also store the models that we build of the users. But we start to do some interesting things here. We normalize. So that noise in that content I mentioned, that inconsistency, how do we get to a point where it is consistent? That we can use machine processes to interpret it. I'm going to be very cautious here. Normalization is not something we necessarily want to present to the end user, because it is a machine process that's modifying the content. And if you read the normalized form, it might be very easy to read because the English is much closer to the English we understand. But the challenge is that it will start to affect the user's view of that material. How do we extract those entities? And from a technical perspective, it's a service-oriented approach. We can plug together different techniques and technologies. By using a standard content management system, we can bring in a whole load of different tools from the web. I've mentioned user modeling, and we'll look how we handle social network analysis. Because we communicate in different ways, both amongst ourselves, but also the people within the material that you're reading about. And that's of interest to us. This is a tool. We're going to see a link for it later on, which I think many people will have an interest in. What it allows you to do is to upload a piece of text. Just drop it into this box. And this is, in this particular example, 17th century English, quite noisy. And this will normalize it, it'll modernize it essentially. But that facilitates a number of things. It facilitates building search indexes. So you can now search efficiently across that content. And what we found is that this, while it was trained on the 1641 depositions, it's applicable to a much broader range. So what have we built? We've built a research environment that caters for that spectrum of users, and it scaffolds and supports those users. So it offers guidance for them when needed. It has on-the-side supports to highlight other interesting material for them. That, as I said, sits on the side. It leverages those entities, those people, places, events that are extracted from the material, and it uses the user's activities to indicate the degree of interest. So the more I annotate a certain set of topics, the more bookmarking I perform, the deeper I can, the models can be built on my behalf. And it's non-invasive, but we see that demoed. So I've been lucky to have a really strong group of collaborators on this project. From Cometric, who do the social network and influencer network analysis, to University of Padua, who bring the IPSA collection as well as computer science expertise and annotation. Technical University of Graz, and we're going to hear a presentation all about user-centric evaluation, user-centric design. And they deal with those kind of evaluation challenges. These are complex systems to evaluate because you've got personalization in the mix, which means not every user is receiving the same product. In fact, not every user has the same interest in the environment that they're navigating. So how do we handle that balance? Pintel Consulting, who've helped with the management aspects of the project and supported the evaluation. Sofia University, who delivered, from a mathematical perspective, those normalization tools. And these are pure maths efforts. So they can take any corpus of text and normalize it. I mentioned in passing OCR, so optical character recognition. That introduces a lot of challenges. They can use the same techniques that they use in the 1641 depositions. They can use any OCR text to correct those errors. IBM and Haifa have delivered entity-oriented search based on entity extraction. So Sarah will talk about how do they pull out those people from this material. And in Trinity here, we're a very interesting partner because we've got two heads. So from a computer science perspective and a coordination perspective, we're leading the personalization, the development of the environment, some of the annotation side, as well as all the management. And from the history side then, representing users, bringing the 1641 corpus, bringing the expertise necessary to scrutinize and understand that. So a lot of ingredients that come together to make the CULTURA project. So what about you? Well, the first thing, if you hadn't done it yet, go to cultura-project.eu at some stage, create your own account, play with these tools and technologies that we're going to demonstrate today, because it'll give you an insight into their possibility. Even if you're not interested in those specific collections, it gives you a sense of what you could offer users on collections that you may have. Check out our information website for publications and so forth. And at any stage, contact me if there's any information. You're not sure who to contact. And later on, we'll give you a lot of different contact details for people who have handled a lot of the different technologies in this project. So this is just the beginning, but thank you.